Eleanor Winters stood at her easel, paintbrush in hand, staring at the blank canvas before her. At 43, she had mastered the technical aspects of painting: light, color, composition, but lately, something was missing from her work. The gallery owner who had represented her for 15 years had mentioned it during their last meeting, choosing his words carefully. "Your new pieces are technically flawless, Ellie," Marcus had said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "But they feel different, like you're holding something back." She had nodded, unable to argue. The paintings were good. Customers still bought them. Critics still praised her skill. But she knew what he meant. The soul had gone out of her work 3 years ago, on the day her husband David told her he was leaving. Outside her studio window, autumn had transformed the Maine coastline into a symphony of russets and golds. The old Victorian house she'd inherited from her grandmother sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, providing the perfect light and solitude for an artist. Most days she considered herself lucky. Today, with the deadline for her next exhibition looming and nothing but hollow, pretty pictures to show for it, she felt like a fraud. Eleanor set down her brush and pulled the band from her hair, letting dark curls streaked with silver fall around her shoulders. She moved to the window, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The house had been her sanctuary since the divorce, a place to heal and reinvent herself. Away from Boston, away from the life she built with David, away from the whispers of friends who had quietly taken sides. Her phone buzzed on the small table where she kept her paints, probably Marcus checking on her progress. She let it go to voicemail, unwilling to admit she had nothing worth showing. The phone buzzed again insistently. With a sigh, she picked it up, frowning at the unfamiliar number with the Seattle area code. "Hello. Is this Eleanor Winters?" The voice was female, young, uncertain. "Speaking," Eleanor said, instantly alert to the hesitation on the other end of the line. "Wrong numbers didn't ask for you by name. My name is Abigail Chun." The voice faltered. "I think I might be your daughter." Eleanor's knees weakened. She lowered herself onto the wooden stool beside her easel, her free hand gripping the edge of her painting table. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the sudden roaring in her ears. "I don't have any children." There was a pause, then a soft, apologetic laugh. "I know this sounds crazy and I'm probably wrong, but I found some letters and a birth certificate. My birth mother's name was Eleanor Winters. She was an art student at Rhode Island School of Design. She would have been 20 years old when I was born." The paintbrush Eleanor had been holding clattered to the floor. The details were too specific to dismiss. She had indeed been an art student at RISD, and there had been a baby. A decision made when she was barely more than a child herself, a secret she had buried so deeply she sometimes convinced herself it had happened to someone else. "How did you find me?" It was all she could manage to ask. "I hired a private investigator," Abigail said. "After my adoptive parents died last year, I found the original birth certificate among their papers. I've been searching ever since." Eleanor closed her eyes. 23 years had passed since she had signed away her rights to the tiny, dark-haired baby girl she had held just once in the hospital. 23 years of wondering, occasionally allowing herself to calculate how old the child would be now, what she might be like, before shutting down those thoughts as unproductive, selfish even. "I'm sorry if I've upset you," Abigail continued into the silence. I thought you might want to know I exist. And I'd like to meet you if you're open to that." Eleanor opened her eyes, her gaze falling on the blank canvas that had been mocking her all morning. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'd like that too." The cafe in downtown Portland was Eleanor's suggestion. It was 40 minutes from her home in Bailey Cove, close enough to be convenient but removed from her daily routines, a neutral space for a meeting that left her simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She arrived 30 minutes early, selecting a table by the window that offered a view of the street. She ordered a black coffee and tried to calm her racing thoughts. What did one wear to meet the daughter she had given up for adoption as a frightened college student? Eleanor had agonized over her outfit, finally settling on a simple blue dress that David had once said brought out the color of her eyes. She had resisted the urge to wear her artist's clothes, the paint-splattered jeans and oversized sweaters that had become her uniform since moving to Maine. She spotted Abigail before the young woman saw her. There was no mistaking the connection. The same dark curls, though Abigail wore hers short in a stylish bob, the same high cheekbones and slightly upturned nose. But there were differences too. Abigail was taller, her complexion a warm olive tone that hinted at her biological father's Italian heritage. Watching her daughter scan the cafe, Eleanor felt a surge of emotion so intense it nearly took her breath away. Love, guilt, pride, fear, all tangled together in a knot too complex to unravel. She raised a hand in a small wave, and Abigail's eyes locked onto hers. The young woman approached, her stride confident despite the uncertainty in her expression. "Eleanor?" she asked, her voice the same soft tenor it had been on the phone. Eleanor stood, fighting the inappropriately strong urge to embrace this stranger who was also, impossibly, her child. "Abigail, please sit down." They sat across from each other, the small round table between them suddenly seeming like an unbridgeable chasm. Eleanor studied the young woman's face, hungrily noting each feature, searching for echoes of herself, of Antonio, the Italian exchange student who had been a brief but intense romance in her sophomore year, gone back to Milan before she ever knew she was pregnant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Abigail said, breaking the silence. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar that Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. She did the same thing when she was nervous. "I'm glad you found me," Eleanor said, meaning it. "I've thought about you often over the years. Wondered if you were happy, if you had a good life." Abigail smiled, revealing a slight dimple in her right cheek. "I did. My parents, my adoptive parents, were wonderful people. Kind, supportive. They told me I was adopted when I was very young, so I always knew. But they never had any information about my birth parents, just that my mother was an art student who wanted me to have opportunities she couldn't provide." Eleanor nodded, throat tight. "That's what they told me to write in the letter, the one that would go in your file. But it was true. I was 20, barely supporting myself, and your father, he had returned to Italy. We'd already broken up before I found out I was pregnant. Does he know about me?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. I tried to find him when I learned I was pregnant, but this was before the internet made the world so small. His university said he'd completed his exchange program and returned home. I had no way to contact him." The waiter appeared at their table, and Abigail ordered a cappuccino. When he left, she reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I brought some photos if you'd like to see them." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Abigail slid several photographs across the table: a toddler on a tricycle, a gap-toothed child in a soccer uniform, a teenager with braces, posing with an older couple on what appeared to be a hiking trail, a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, beaming at the camera. "Your parents," Eleanor said, touching the image of the couple. "They look kind." "They were the best," Abigail said, a shadow crossing her face. "Dad had a heart attack 2 years ago. Mom held on for another year after that, but she had cancer. Pancreatic. It was quick, at least." "I'm so sorry," Eleanor said, reaching across the table instinctively to touch Abigail's hand. The younger woman didn't pull away, and for a moment, they sat in silence, connected by that small point of contact. "They would have been okay with this, with me finding you," Abigail said finally. "They were never threatened by the idea of my birth parents. They used to say that families come in all forms, and that love isn't limited." "They sound very wise," Eleanor said, withdrawing her hand. "And they clearly raised an extraordinary daughter." Abigail blushed slightly. "I turned out okay, I guess. I'm a software engineer. I work for a company in Seattle that develops educational apps for children with learning disabilities. It's meaningful work." "That's wonderful," Eleanor said, feeling oddly proud of this accomplished young woman, who had her eyes, but not her artistic temperament. "And is there someone special in your life?" Abigail twisted a thin silver band on her right hand. "I'm engaged. His name is Tyler. He's a teacher, special education. We met through work, actually. He was consulting on one of our products." She smiled, a private, contented smile that made Eleanor's heart ache with a strange mixture of joy and loss. "We're getting married next spring." "Congratulations," Eleanor said. "He sounds wonderful." The conversation flowed more easily after that. They talked about Abigail's work, her life in Seattle, her plans for the wedding. Eleanor found herself sharing stories about her career as an artist, her house on the coast, even eventually, her divorce from David. 3 years isn't that long, Abigail observed when Eleanor mentioned how recently her marriage had ended. Have you been able to move on? Eleanor considered the question. Had she moved on? She lived alone, painted, walked the beach, read books by the fire. She had a few friends in the local community, other artists, the owners of the bookshop in town, her elderly neighbor, who brought her fresh eggs from his chickens. It was a quiet life, and most days it was enough. I'm still figuring that out, she admitted. The divorce wasn't my choice, which made it harder, I think. David met someone else, a younger colleague at his architectural firm. It was very cliché. She attempted a smile. But I'm finding my way. My work keeps me busy. I looked you up online, Abigail confessed. Your paintings are beautiful. Thank you, Eleanor said, wondering which of her works Abigail had seen, whether they were from before or after the divorce, whether her daughter could see the difference that Marcus had pointed out. Art has always been my constant through everything. They talked until the cafe began to fill with the dinner crowd, both startled to realize that hours had passed. As they prepared to leave, Abigail hesitated. I'm in Maine for another 3 days, staying at a B&B in Portland, she said. I'd love to see where you live, your studio, if that's not too much. Eleanor felt a flutter of panic at the thought of inviting this stranger, her daughter, into her private space. And yet, the idea of saying goodbye so soon was equally unsettling. I'd like that, she said. How about tomorrow? You could come for lunch, and I could show you the studio afterward. Abigail's face lit up. That would be perfect. They exchanged phone numbers, properly this time, and agreed on a time for Abigail to drive out to Bailey Cove the next day. Standing on the sidewalk outside the cafe, they faced the awkward moment of parting. A handshake seemed too formal, but Eleanor wasn't sure if a hug would be welcome. It was Abigail who made the decision, stepping forward to embrace her briefly but firmly. Thank you for today, she said. It means more than I can say. Eleanor watched her walk away. This daughter who had grown up without her, who had her curls and her smile but a life and identity all her own. For the first time in months, she felt an urgent desire to paint, to capture the tumult of emotions this day had unleashed. As she drove home along the coastal highway, the setting sun painting the ocean in shades of amber and violet, Eleanor found herself wondering what David would think of this development. They still spoke occasionally, logistics about the house they had once shared in Boston, which they had finally sold last year, updates about mutual friends, perfunctory birthday wishes. Would he be surprised to learn about the baby she had given up before she met him? She had never told him. It had seemed unnecessary to share a painful chapter from her past that had no bearing on their present. But had that secrecy, that compartmentalization been a sign? Had she ever truly let David see all of her? The good and the bad, the proud achievements and the shameful regrets? Or had she presented a carefully curated version of herself throughout their marriage, just as she did with her paintings, technically perfect but lacking the raw honesty that would make them truly alive? The questions followed her home, into her quiet house with its empty rooms and magnificent views. She moved through her evening routine. A light dinner, a glass of wine on the porch watching the stars emerge, a hot bath before bed. But her mind remained fixed on the day's revelations and on what tomorrow might bring. In her studio, she paused before the blank canvas she had abandoned that morning. On impulse, she picked up a brush, mixed a rich, dark blue, and made a single decisive stroke across the white surface. It was a beginning. Eleanor woke at dawn, as was her habit, but instead of her usual leisurely morning of coffee and reading, she found herself seized by a restless energy. After a quick breakfast, she headed to her studio and stood before the canvas she had started the night before. Just that single blue stroke, bold against the white. Without conscious planning, she began to paint, working with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. Colors flowed from her brush, deep blues, vibrant purples, fiery oranges, forming a seascape unlike any she had created before. This wasn't the picturesque coastline tourists came to Maine to see. This was the ocean as a living entity, powerful and unpredictable, beautiful and terrifying all at once. She lost track of time, completely absorbed in the work. When she finally stepped back, she was surprised to see that 3 hours had passed and that the painting was nearly complete. She was even more surprised by what she had created. A storm at sea, waves crashing against familiar cliffs, but with a strange luminous quality to the sky, as if the sun were trying to break through the dark clouds. It was raw emotional work, lacking the polished restraint of her recent paintings. A glance at her watch jolted her back to reality. Abigail would arrive in less than 2 hours, and Eleanor had planned to prepare a special lunch. She hurried to clean her brushes and change out of her paint-stained clothes, trying to quiet the nervous fluttering in her stomach. In the kitchen, she assembled the ingredients for a simple but elegant meal: a salad of local greens with roasted beets and goat cheese, freshly baked bread from the artisanal bakery in town, wild mushroom soup made with chanterelle she had foraged herself the previous week. As she chopped and stirred, she realized she was humming, something she hadn't done in months. The sound of tires on gravel announced Abigail's arrival precisely at noon. Eleanor wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to the door, watching through the window as her daughter emerged from a rental car, pausing to look up at the Victorian house with its weathered gray shingles and white trim. "Welcome," Eleanor said, opening the door before Abigail could knock. "You found it without any trouble?" "Your directions were perfect," Abigail said, stepping inside. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you. Just a little thank you for having me." Eleanor took the gift, touched by the gesture. "You didn't need to bring anything, but thank you." She led Abigail through the house to the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through large windows overlooking the ocean. "I hope you're hungry. I might have gone a bit overboard with lunch." "It smells amazing," Abigail said, her eyes taking in the cozy kitchen with its vintage stove and open shelves displaying Eleanor's collection of handmade pottery. "What a beautiful home. It has so much character." "It was my grandmother's," Eleanor explained, gesturing for Abigail to sit at the small table by the window while she served the soup. "I used to spend summers here as a child. When she died 5 years ago, she left it to me. David and I would come up on weekends, but I didn't move here full-time until after the divorce." "It suits you," Abigail said, accepting the bowl of steaming soup. "It feels like an artist's home. All this natural light, the views of the ocean. I bet it changes constantly, the scenery outside your windows." "That's exactly what drew my grandmother here in the first place," Eleanor said, bringing the bread and salad to the table before sitting across from Abigail. "She was a writer, poetry mostly, though she published a few novels in the 60s. She said the sea was never the same 2 days running, and that kept her imagination alive." They ate and talked, the initial awkwardness of the previous day giving way to a more comfortable rhythm. Eleanor found herself sharing stories about her childhood, her years at RISD, her early struggles to establish herself as an artist. Abigail spoke more about her fiancé, about growing up in Denver with adoptive parents who had encouraged her interest in both technology and social causes. "They sound like remarkable people," Eleanor said when Abigail described how her parents had fostered several children with special needs over the years, in addition to adopting her. "I'm glad they found you, that you found each other." "Me too," Abigail said, her expression softening. "I know it must be strange to hear me talk about them, but—" "No, not at all," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm genuinely happy that you had such a loving family. That was what I wanted for you, what I couldn't provide at 20. Abigail was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her water glass with a fingertip. "Can I ask, was it a difficult decision? To give me up?" Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "Yes and no. The circumstances were difficult. I was still a student, barely making ends meet with part-time jobs and student loans. Your biological father was gone. My parents made it clear they wouldn't support me if I decided to keep you. They were deeply religious and considered an out-of-wedlock pregnancy a terrible shame." She paused, remembering the lonely apartment in Providence where she had spent the last months of her pregnancy, the kindly social worker who had helped her navigate the adoption process, the single night in the hospital with her newborn daughter. A perfect, tiny being with a shock of dark hair and unfocused eyes. "But the decision itself," she continued softly, "once I accepted the reality of the situation, wasn't as difficult as staying with it afterward. I knew I couldn't give you the life you deserved, Not then, not alone. But knowing something is right doesn't always make it easy to bear. Did you ever regret it? Abigail asked, her voice equally soft. Eleanor considered the question carefully. I regretted the circumstances that made it necessary. I regretted not being older, more established, more capable of caring for a child on my own. I regretted not having a partner who could have been a father to you. She met Abigail's gaze directly. But I never regretted the choice itself, because it gave you a chance at a better life than I could have provided. And from what you've told me, it seems like that's exactly what happened. Abigail nodded, blinking rapidly as if fighting tears. Thank you for being honest. And yes, I had a wonderful life with my parents. I've never resented being adopted. I always knew I was wanted, cherished even. Finding you wasn't about filling some void or resolving childhood issues. It was just curiosity, I guess. A desire to understand where I came from. I'm glad you were curious, Eleanor said, smiling through the tightness in her throat. And I'm honored that you wanted to find me. After lunch, Eleanor showed Abigail around the house. The living room with its stone fireplace and comfortable, slightly shabby furniture. The sunroom where she read and sometimes sketched. The small guest bedroom with its view of the garden. Her own room with its antique four-poster bed and collection of vintage clothing. Finally, they reached the studio. A large room that had once been a porch but had been enclosed with walls of windows by Eleanor's grandmother to create a bright, inspiring space. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against the walls. An easel stood by the largest window, holding the seascape Eleanor had worked on that morning. Oh, Abigail said, moving immediately to the painting. This is incredible. So different from the works I saw online. Eleanor stood beside her, seeing the painting through fresh eyes. It was different. More emotional, less controlled than her recent work. The brushstrokes were visible, almost agitated in places, the colors more vibrant and less harmonious than her usual palette. I started it this morning, she admitted. I couldn't sleep, and when I came in here it just happened. It's like you can feel the storm, Abigail said, leaning closer to examine the technique. But there's that light breaking through. It's powerful. Eleanor felt simultaneously exposed and understood. An unsettling combination. She moved to a stack of canvases in the corner. Would you like to see some of my other recent work? These are for my next exhibition. She showed Abigail several of her more typical paintings, meticulously rendered coastal scenes, technically perfect but, she now recognized, somewhat soulless. These are beautiful too, Abigail said diplomatically. But the storm, that one speaks to me more. It feels more authentic somehow. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the truth in her daughter's observation. My gallery owner said something similar recently, that my work has changed. He was too polite to say it wasn't for the better. Is it because of the divorce? Abigail asked, then immediately backtracked. I'm sorry, that's probably too personal. No, it's a fair question, Eleanor said, moving to sit on the window seat that ran along one wall of the studio. Abigail joined her and for a moment, they both gazed out at the ocean, its surface calm today, reflecting the clear autumn sky. I think the divorce is part of it, Eleanor continued. When your entire life changes suddenly, it affects everything, including your creative expression. But it's more than that. I've been playing it safe, technically and emotionally, creating pretty pictures that don't reveal too much. And now, Abigail gestured toward the storm painting. Eleanor smiled ruefully. And now I have a daughter who appears out of nowhere, turning everything upside down again, but in a good way. It seems I can't hide from my emotions any longer, not even in my work. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the studio, with Eleanor showing Abigail different techniques and materials. Though not an artist herself, Abigail was genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions and admiring Eleanor's collection of brushes, many of which she had owned for decades. As the light began to fade, they moved to the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades remarkably similar to those in Eleanor's morning painting. What will you do with it? Abigail asked, nodding toward the studio. The storm painting. I'm not sure, Eleanor admitted. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the collection for the exhibition, but I think it might be the beginning of something new for me. Something better, Abigail suggested. Something more honest, at least, Eleanor agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Abigail checked her watch reluctantly. I should probably head back to Portland soon. I promised Tyler I'd call him tonight, and the B&B has spotty cell reception. Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment but nodded. Of course. It's been a lovely day. As they walked to Abigail's car, Eleanor remembered the gift she had set aside during lunch. I never opened your present, she said. Should I do that now? If you'd like, Abigail said, suddenly seeming nervous. Eleanor carefully unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small, flat box. Inside, nestled on cotton wool, was a pendant. A delicate silver tree with tiny leaves in green enamel. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, lifting it from the box. It's a family tree, Abigail explained. I know we're just getting to know each other, but regardless of what happens next, we are family. I thought it might be a nice symbol of that connection. Touched beyond words, Eleanor fastened the necklace around her throat. I'll cherish it, she said. Thank you. They hugged goodbye, longer this time with less hesitation. I fly back to Seattle the day after tomorrow, Abigail said as she got into her car. But I'd like to see you once more before I go, if that's possible. I'd like that too, Eleanor said. Call me tomorrow and we'll make a plan. She stood in the driveway, watching until Abigail's taillights disappeared around the bend in the road. The house felt eerily quiet when she went back inside, as if it had grown accustomed to having two voices within its walls over the course of a single day. In the studio, Eleanor stood before the storm painting, seeing it with new clarity. It was the first honest work she had created since the divorce, perhaps even before that. It represented the tumult of her emotions, the anger and grief of losing her marriage, the shock and joy of finding her daughter, the fear and excitement of what might come next. On impulse, she picked up her phone and called Marcus. Eleanor, he answered, surprise evident in his voice. I was just about to email you. The exhibition is in less than a month, and I need to change direction, Marcus, she interrupted. The paintings I've been working on, they're not right. They're not me, not anymore. There was a pause, then a cautious, go on. I started something new today. It's different, rawer, more emotional. I think it's what I need to be doing now. One new painting won't make an exhibition, Ellie. I know that, but I can create more quickly. I feel unblocked, I guess, for the first time in years. Another pause, longer this time. This wouldn't have anything to do with why you've been ignoring my calls, would it? Eleanor laughed, the sound surprising even her. Actually, yes. It's a long story, but I found out I have a daughter. Or rather, she found me. A daughter. Marcus's voice rose in pitch. Ellie, what are you talking about? Like I said, long story. From before I met David. I gave her up for adoption as a baby, and now she's 23 and an engineer in Seattle, and she found me. We spent the day together. My God, Marcus said. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Eleanor said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. I'm inspired. For the first time in a long time. Well, that's unexpected, but good. Very good. He cleared his throat. But about the exhibition. I need you to trust me, Marcus. Give me 2 weeks to show you what I can do. If it's not working, we can delay the exhibition, use the original paintings, whatever you think is best. But I need to try this. There was a third pause, and Eleanor could almost see Marcus removing his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as he weighed the risk against their long professional relationship. 2 weeks, he said finally. Send me photos of the new work as you complete each piece. If it's as good as you think it is, we'll proceed with the original date. If not, I'll accept whatever decision you make, Eleanor promised. Thank you, Marcus. After they hung up, Eleanor mixed fresh paints and began a second canvas, working well into the night. This one depicted not a seascape but a forest in autumn, rich with golds and crimsons, sunlight filtering through branches, suggesting both abundance and impending change. When she finally went to bed, exhausted but exhilarated, she dreamed of a young woman walking through that forest, following a path that twisted and turned but always led forward. The next day, Abigail called mid-morning to suggest dinner in Portland. There's a restaurant my B&B host recommended, seafood, right on the water. My treat this time. They agreed to meet at 7, giving Eleanor another full day to paint. She worked with focused intensity, completing the forest scene and beginning a third canvas. This one more abstract, a whirl of colors that somehow suggested movement, transition, the sensation of being simultaneously lost and found. By the time she left for Portland, she had the bones of a new collection taking shape in her studio, work that felt true in a way her painting hadn't in years. The restaurant was busy, but Abigail had secured a table by the window with a view of the harbor. She waved when she spotted Eleanor, rising to greet her with a warm hug that felt remarkably natural given how short their acquaintance had been. "You look different tonight," Abigail observed as they sat down. "More, I don't know, energized." Eleanor smiled, touching the tree pendant that hung around her neck. "I've been painting all day. It's going well. Better than it has in a long time." "Because of our meeting?" Abigail asked, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Partly," Eleanor acknowledged. "You've shaken things up for me, in the best possible way. Made me confront parts of myself I've been avoiding. It's translating into the work." "I'm glad," Abigail said, seeming genuinely pleased. "I worried that showing up in your life might be disruptive in a negative way." "Life is disruption," Eleanor said. "It's what we do with the unexpected that matters." They ordered wine and food, fresh oysters, grilled scallops, locally caught halibut, and settled into conversation that ranged from art to technology to politics to more personal territory. "I've told you about my life," Eleanor said as they shared a dessert, blueberry cobbler with vanilla ice cream. "But there's still so much I don't know about yours. What was your childhood like? What kind of little girl were you?" Abigail laughed, a light, easy sound that made Eleanor's heart contract with a mixture of joy and loss for all the years she hadn't heard it. "I was serious, extremely organized, and absolutely determined to figure out how everything worked," Abigail said. "My room was always immaculate, everything categorized, labeled, in its place. My parents used to joke that I was the only 5-year-old they knew who color-coded her crayons." "That doesn't sound like me at all," Eleanor admitted, smiling. "My space has always been creative chaos. My mother despaired of ever teaching me to be tidy." "Nature versus nurture in action, I guess," Abigail said, then hesitated. "Though I do have one trait that might come from you. I draw sometimes. Nothing serious, just sketches, mostly for my own enjoyment. But I've always had a good eye for detail, for seeing how things fit together." "I'd love to see your drawings sometime," Eleanor said. "If you'd be comfortable sharing them." "Maybe," Abigail said, suddenly shy. "They're really not very good." "Art isn't about good," Eleanor said. "It's about expression, connection. If it brings you joy, that's what matters." The conversation turned to Abigail's plans for the next day, her final day in Maine before flying back to Seattle. "I need to check out of the B&B by 11, she said. "My flight isn't until late afternoon, but I thought I might explore a bit more of the coast before heading to the airport." "Why don't you come back to the house?" Eleanor suggested impulsively. "You could spend the day there, and I could drive you to the airport afterward." Abigail's face lit up. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "I'm sure," Eleanor said. "I'd like to have more time with you before you go." They finalized their plans and after dinner said goodbye with another hug, this one longer, less tentative. As Eleanor drove home along the dark coastal highway, she found herself already anticipating the next day, already feeling the peculiar emptiness that would follow Abigail's departure. She had lived alone for 3 years and had grown accustomed to solitude, had even come to value it. But in just 2 days, this young woman, her daughter, had awakened something in her that she hadn't realized was sleeping, a desire for connection that went beyond her small circle of casual friends, beyond even the intimacy she had shared with David. It was a startling revelation, and one that left her both exhilarated and frightened. What would happen when Abigail returned to her life in Seattle? Would they stay in touch? Would they build some kind of ongoing relationship? And if they did, what form would it take? These questions accompanied her home, followed her into the studio where she worked for another hour despite the late hour, and finally chased her into dreams filled with forests and oceans and faces both familiar and strange. Abigail arrived the next morning with pastries from a bakery in Portland and a brightness that belied the impending farewell. They ate breakfast on the porch despite the autumn chill wrapped in. I love it here, Abigail said, gazing out at the ocean. I can see why you stayed. There's something healing about this place. Eleanor nodded, watching gulls wheel over the water. It saved me in a way. After David left, I couldn't bear to stay in Boston. Too many memories, too many pitying looks from friends. Here I could just be. Start over. Do you think you'll ever move back to the city? Eleanor considered the question. I don't know. For a long time I would have said no. But lately, she smiled. Lately I'm beginning to think there might be more chapters to my story than I'd imagined. After breakfast, Eleanor showed Abigail her new paintings, the forest scene completed the previous day, the abstract work still in progress, and 2 new canvases she had prepared with background washes in anticipation of starting them later. These are all so different from each other, Abigail observed. But they share something, an energy, a feeling. They're connected by emotion rather than subject matter, Eleanor explained. I'm trying to create a narrative through color and movement. The journey from storm to calm, from confusion to clarity, from loss to discovery, Abigail suggested quietly. Eleanor nodded, touched by her daughter's intuitive understanding. Exactly. They spent the morning in the studio, with Eleanor painting and Abigail sketching in a small notebook she had brought with her. Occasionally, they would exchange observations or questions, but mostly they worked in companionable silence, the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows and casting long, warm patches on the wooden floor. Around noon, Eleanor suggested a walk on the beach before lunch. They bundled up against the brisk wind and took the narrow path that wound down the cliff to a small, secluded cove below the house. The tide was out, revealing tide pools among the rocks where starfish clung and small crabs scuttled sideways. Abigail crouched to examine them, her face alight with the same curiosity Eleanor imagined she must have shown as a child discovering the natural world. Tyler and I are thinking about starting a family soon, Abigail said suddenly, her gaze still fixed on a particularly vibrant purple starfish. Not right away, but maybe in a year or 2, after we're settled in our new house. Eleanor felt a jolt of emotion, surprise, joy, and an unexpected pang of something like grief. That's wonderful, she said. You'll be an amazing mother. Abigail looked up, her expression serious. I hope so. I had great examples. She stood, brushing sand from her jeans. I'd like my children to know you, their biological grandmother. If that's something you'd want. Eleanor's throat tightened. I would want that very much, she managed to say. More than I can express. They walked along the water's edge in silence for a while, each absorbed in her own thoughts. The conversation had shifted something between them, Eleanor realized, had expanded their nascent relationship beyond the present moment into a possible future that stretched before them like the long curve of the shoreline, disappearing into distant mist but undeniably there. What about you? Abigail asked eventually. Do you think you'll ever want to be with someone again? After David, I mean. The question caught Eleanor off guard. She had been so focused on her work, on surviving the pain of David's betrayal and rebuilding her life, that the possibility of another relationship had seemed remote, almost irrelevant. I haven't thought much about it, she admitted. At first I was too hurt, too angry, and then I guess I just got used to being alone. She paused, watching a wave recede, leaving gleaming wet sand in its wake. But being with someone again? I don't know. Maybe. If the right person came along. I hope they do, Abigail said. You deserve to be happy. They returned to the house for a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches, eating in the kitchen where they had shared their first meal together just 2 days earlier. The easy comfort they had developed with each other made it difficult to believe their relationship was so new, so tentative. After lunch, as the afternoon light began to soften, signaling that it was time to think about leaving for the airport, Eleanor excused herself briefly and went to her studio. She returned with a small canvas, about 12 by 16 inches, wrapped carefully in protective paper. I want you to have this, she said, handing it to Abigail. It's not one of the new paintings, but it's special to me. Abigail unwrapped the paper to reveal a luminous watercolor of a young woman standing on a cliff, her back to the viewer, gazing out at a vast ocean. The figure's posture conveyed both strength and vulnerability, and the colors, soft blues, greens, and golds, created an atmosphere of peaceful contemplation. I painted it years ago during a summer visit here before my grandmother died, Eleanor explained. I was going through a difficult period, questioning my work, my choices. The solitude here helped me find my center again. She touched the edge of the frame lightly. It reminds me that we're always more than our worst moments, that there's always beauty to be found, even in pain. Abigail ran her fingertips reverently over the painting. It's beautiful, she whispered. Thank you. The drive to the Portland airport was mostly silent, both women aware of the impending separation yet reluctant to address it directly. Only when Eleanor pulled up to the departures area did the reality of goodbye become unavoidable. I'll come to Seattle, Eleanor said as they stood beside Abigail's luggage on the curb. When your exhibition opens next month, I'll fly out for it. If that would be okay. I'd love that, Abigail said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And the wedding, it's next May. I know it's months away, but I'd really like you to be there. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Eleanor promised, her own eyes welling. They embraced, holding each other tightly, neither quite ready to let go. Thank you for finding me, Eleanor whispered. Thank you for letting yourself be found, Abigail replied. And then she was gone, disappearing through the sliding doors into the terminal, leaving Eleanor standing alone with the echo of her daughter's words resonating in her mind. The house felt emptier than ever when Eleanor returned. She moved restlessly from room to room, touching objects, straightening pictures, anything to keep her hands busy while her mind replayed every moment of the past 3 days. Finally, she ended up in her studio, where the new paintings waited, tangible evidence of the transformation that had begun with Abigail's unexpected phone call. The storm, the forest, the abstract swirl of emotions taking shape, they formed a narrative of her awakening, a chronicle of her journey from frozen grief to something like hope. On impulse, she reached for her phone and scrolled to a number she rarely called anymore. Ellie. David's voice was surprised but warm. Is everything okay? Yes, she said, settling onto the window seat where she had sat with Abigail the day before. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to tell you something. Something important. There was a pause, then David said, I'm listening. I had a baby, Eleanor said, the words coming easier than she expected. Before I met you. When I was in college. A little girl. I gave her up for adoption. Another pause, longer this time. Ellie, I had no idea. I never told anyone, she admitted. It was painful, and then it was in the past, and then, I don't know. It seemed like something separate from my life with you. Why are you telling me now? Eleanor looked out at the darkening ocean, at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Because she found me. My daughter. Her name is Abigail and she's 23, and she's been here in Maine for the past 3 days. And meeting her has changed everything. David was quiet for so long that Eleanor wondered if the call had dropped. Then softly he said, Tell me about her. So she did. She told him about Abigail's career in Seattle, about her fiancé Tyler, about her childhood in Denver with parents who had loved her unconditionally. She told him about their conversations, their walk on the beach, the way Abigail had understood her paintings in a way few people ever had. She sounds remarkable, David said when she finished. I'm happy for you, Ellie. Truly. Thank you, she said, surprised by how much his approval still mattered to her. I wanted you to know. We were together for so long, and even though things ended badly, you're still a part of my story. This felt too important not to share. I appreciate that, he said. And I'm glad you called. They talked a bit more about his work, about mutual friends, about the changing seasons. It was the longest, most honest conversation they had had since the divorce, free of the tension and resentment that had colored their interactions for the past 3 years. When they finally said goodbye, Eleanor felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Not just with David, but with a part of herself that had been holding on to anger and hurt longer than was healthy or necessary. In the days that followed, Eleanor painted with a focus and passion she hadn't felt in years. The new collection took shape rapidly. 7 canvases that, viewed together, told a story of transformation, of finding one's way through darkness into light. She sent photos to Marcus as promised, and his enthusiasm exceeded even her hopes. This is the work I've been waiting for, Ellie, he said during one of their daily calls. Raw, honest, powerful. The exhibition is going to be a triumph. She and Abigail spoke often. Sometimes just brief text messages sharing moments from their days. Sometimes longer video calls where they explored their growing relationship with a candor that might have been difficult in person. "I've told Tyler all about you," Abigail said during one such call, about a week after her visit. "He can't wait to meet you when you come for the exhibition." "I'm looking forward to it too," Eleanor said, then hesitated. "Abby, there's something I've been thinking about. Your biological father, Antonio. I never tried to find him after you were born. It didn't seem necessary then. But if you wanted to know more about him, to try to locate him, perhaps I would understand. I would help if I could." Abigail was quiet for a moment, considering. "I've thought about it," she admitted. "But I don't think I need to, at least not right now. Finding you has been enough of a seismic shift for 1 year." She smiled. "Maybe someday when things have settled a bit. But for now, I'm content with the family I have. My parents' memory, Tyler, and you." The exhibition opening in Boston was scheduled for the last week of October. In the days leading up to it, Eleanor found herself filled with a nervous energy that was about more than just displaying her new work. This collection was personal in a way none of her previous shows had been. A visual declaration of the emotional journey she had undertaken since Abigail had come into her life. Marcus had been right about the reception. Critics praised the painting's emotional depth and technical innovation. Collectors circled, making offers on multiple pieces before the night was half over. But for Eleanor, the true measure of success was the quiet moment when she stood with Abigail before the centerpiece of the collection, the storm painting that had started it all. "It's amazing to see them all together like this," Abigail said, her voice soft with wonder. "You've captured something so universal, so human." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "I had a good muse." 2 weeks later, as promised, Eleanor flew to Seattle for Abigail's exhibition. Not an art show, but a demonstration of the educational software her team had developed for children with dyslexia. Watching her daughter confidently explain the technology to a room full of educators and parents, Eleanor felt a pride that went beyond anything she had experienced with her own achievements. That evening, over dinner with Abigail and Tyler at their cozy bungalow in a leafy Seattle neighborhood, Eleanor found herself thinking about the strange, winding paths that had brought them all to this moment. The choices made decades ago, the sorrows and joys that had shaped them, the unexpected connections that had emerged from seeming coincidence. "A penny for your thoughts," Abigail said, noticing her contemplative expression. Eleanor smiled, raising her wine glass in a toast. "I was just thinking about the masterpiece that is a life, how it's never finished until the very end. How it's composed of layer upon layer of experience, some bright, some dark, but all essential to the whole." "Like a painting," Tyler observed, his fondness for Abigail evident in the way he looked at her. "Exactly like a painting," Eleanor agreed. "And sometimes, just when you think you've completed it, life hands you a new brush, a new color, and says, 'Keep going. The best part is yet to come.'" Abigail reached across the table to take Eleanor's hand. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her own glass. "And to found family," Eleanor added, her heart full. Outside, rain fell softly on the Seattle streets, its gentle rhythm a counterpoint to the warm conversation inside the small house. Eleanor knew that there would be challenges ahead: the distance between Maine and Washington, the negotiation of boundaries and expectations, the delicate balance of creating a relationship without the foundation of shared history. But as she looked at her daughter's face, alight with happiness and possibilities, she felt a certainty that had eluded her for too long. Whatever came next, they would face it together, adding new layers to the canvas of their intertwined lives with courage, honesty, and the most enduring color of all, forgiveness. Spring arrived in Maine with its customary deliberate pace, first the subtle lengthening of days, then the appearance of crocuses and snowdrops pushing through the last patches of winter snow, and finally the greening of branches against a sky that grew increasingly blue and benevolent. Eleanor had spent the winter months alternating between intense periods of creativity in her studio and trips to Seattle, where her relationship with Abigail continued to deepen and expand. They had settled into a rhythm of regular video calls, text messages that ranged from profound to mundane, and visits that grew more comfortable and less emotionally charged with each reunion. The success of Eleanor's exhibition had brought new opportunities, commissions from collectors impressed by her evolution, invitations to teach masterclasses at art schools along the East Coast, a feature in a prestigious art magazine that characterized her new work as a profound exploration of emotional archaeology, rendered with both technical mastery and raw honesty. But more significant than professional recognition was the personal transformation that had taken root in her life. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary from the world now hummed with a new energy. The guest room permanently outfitted for Abigail's visits, the refrigerator stocked with ingredients for meals to be shared, the studio rearranged to accommodate 2 people working side by side. In late April, with Abigail and Tyler's wedding just 3 weeks away, Eleanor found herself consumed with preparations. She had offered to create a special painting as a wedding gift, a commissioned piece based on conversations with both Abigail and Tyler about their vision for their future together. It was proving to be both challenging and deeply satisfying, requiring her to distill the essence of a relationship she had observed but not experienced firsthand. She was putting the finishing touches on the painting when her phone rang. Marcus, calling from the gallery in Boston. "Ellie, darling, tell me you're sitting down," he said without preamble, his voice vibrating with excitement. "I'm standing in my studio with a paintbrush in my hand," she replied, amused. "What's happened?" "The Hirshhorn Museum wants to include 3 pieces from your new collection in their upcoming exhibition on contemporary emotional landscapes." 3 Ellie. At the Hirshhorn. Eleanor's hand faltered, sending a thin streak of cerulean blue across the canvas she'd been working on. "You're joking." "Would I joke about the Hirshhorn? They specifically requested the storm piece, The Forest at Dawn, and that magnificent abstract with all the movement. Said your work represents a perfect balance between technical precision and emotional authenticity." Eleanor sank onto her stool, her heart pounding. The Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., was one of the country's most prestigious venues for contemporary art. Having work exhibited there would elevate her career to an entirely new level. "When?" she managed to ask. "The exhibition opens in September, but they'll need the pieces by early August. I told them you'd be thrilled, of course, but that I'd have to confirm the details with you." He paused. "This is big, Ellie. Really big." "Yes," she said, her mind already racing ahead to the logistics, the implications. "Yes, it is." After hanging up with Marcus, Eleanor sat motionless in her studio, watching sunlight play across the surface of the ocean beyond her windows. The recognition was gratifying, of course, a validation of the new direction her work had taken since Abigail had come into her life. But what moved her most deeply was the knowledge that the paintings selected for the exhibition were the ones most directly inspired by her journey of reunion and healing. She reached for her phone again, eager to share the news with the person who would understand its significance beyond the professional accolade. Abigail answered on the second ring, her voice breathless. "I was just about to call you. You'll never believe what happened." Eleanor laughed. "You first. Tyler and I just got the keys to our new house. We weren't supposed to close until next week, but everything went through early. We're standing in the empty living room right now." "That's wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed. "Send me pictures." "I will, I promise. But first, what's your news?" Eleanor told her about the Hirshhorn invitation, her voice growing steadier as she shared the details. "Mom, that's incredible," Abigail exulted, using the term of endearment that had emerged naturally over the past months. "I'm so proud of you. This calls for a celebration when you get here for the wedding." "Definitely," Eleanor agreed, warmth spreading through her at Abigail's genuine excitement for her success. "And congratulations on the house. Perfect timing with the wedding so close." "I know, right? It's like everything's falling into place." There was a pause, then Abigail asked, "How's the secret project coming along?" "Almost finished," Eleanor said, glancing at the wedding gift painting. "You'll see it soon enough." They talked a bit longer, about final wedding preparations, about the layout of Abigail and Tyler's new home, about Eleanor's travel plans for the following week. When they hung up, Eleanor returned to her work with renewed purpose, the dual celebrations of professional recognition and family joy infusing her brushstrokes with a special energy. The wedding, held in a botanical garden on the outskirts of Seattle, was everything Eleanor could have hoped for: intimate but joyful, elegant but relaxed, a perfect reflection of the couple it celebrated. Abigail was radiant in a simple gown of ivory silk, her short dark hair crowned with a circlet of spring flowers. Tyler, tall and earnest in a charcoal suit, looked at his bride with such transparent adoration that Eleanor found herself blinking back tears more than once during the ceremony. She had worried briefly about her place in the proceedings, neither fully parent nor merely friend, occupying an undefined space in Abigail's life. But those concerns had been laid to rest when Abigail asked her to do a reading during the ceremony and included her in the small family dinner the night before. "Family is what we make it," Abigail had said, raising a toast at that dinner. "And I'm so grateful that mine includes all of you." The wedding gift painting was received with exactly the emotional response Eleanor had hoped for. Gasps of delight followed by thoughtful silence, as the couple absorbed the layers of meaning she had woven into the image. She had created a landscape that was both real and metaphorical, a path winding through flowering meadows and shadowy forests, beside tranquil lakes and across rocky highlands, always moving forward, always together. "It's our journey," Tyler said, his arm around Abigail's waist. "Past, present, and future." "It's perfect," Abigail agreed, hugging Eleanor fiercely. "Absolutely perfect." In the days following the wedding, as Eleanor prepared to return to Maine, Abigail and Tyler made an announcement that changed everything yet again. "We've been talking," Abigail said, sitting with Eleanor on the porch of their new house, watching twilight settle over the neighborhood. "About the future, about family." Eleanor nodded, sensing the importance of the moment. "We're going to start trying for a baby," Abigail continued, "sooner rather than later. And we've both been thinking about what that means for all of us." "I'm so happy for you," Eleanor said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "You'll be wonderful parents." "That's just it," Abigail said, her expression earnest. "We want our children to know their family, all of their family. And that includes you. Not just for occasional visits, but as a real presence in their lives." Eleanor's heart beat faster. "What are you saying exactly?" "We're saying," Tyler interjected, joining them on the porch with glasses of wine, "that we want you to consider moving closer. Not necessarily to Seattle if that's not right for you, but perhaps not as far away as Maine." "We know it's a lot to ask," Abigail added quickly. "You have your home, your studio, your whole life on the East Coast. But with the success you've been having, with your work being shown nationally now, we thought maybe it might be something you'd consider." Eleanor gazed out at the unfamiliar street, the houses glowing with warm light against the deepening blue of evening. The suggestion was simultaneously terrifying and tantalizing. Leaving the sanctuary she had created in Maine, starting yet another new chapter at an age when many people were settling into comfortable routines. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "It's such a big decision." "You don't have to decide anything now," Tyler assured her. "We just wanted to put the idea out there, for you to think about." "Would you really want me that close?" Eleanor asked, looking directly at Abigail. "Our relationship is still so new, so fragile in some ways." "That's exactly why," Abigail said. "So it can grow stronger, deeper. So our children can know you as Grandma, not as someone they see once or twice a year." Grandma. The word resonated in Eleanor's mind, opening doors to possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. "I'll think about it," she promised. "Really think about it." The conversation stayed with her on the flight back to Maine, during the drive from Portland to Bailey Cove, as she moved through her house that suddenly seemed both beloved and somehow provisional, a way station rather than a final destination. In her studio, she found herself drawn to the window seat where she and Abigail had sat during that first visit, looking out at the ocean that had been her constant companion through grief and recovery. What would it mean to leave this place that had sheltered her, inspired her, helped her rebuild her sense of self after the collapse of her marriage? But what would it mean to be present for the next generation of her family, to watch Abigail's children grow, to be not just a biological connection but a living, breathing participant in their lives? Over the next few weeks, as spring deepened into early summer, Eleanor found herself viewing her daily routines with new awareness, mentally cataloging what she would miss about this place, what she might gain from a different one. She walked the beach, collecting shells and smoothed glass as she had done since childhood. She painted in her studio, attuned to the particular quality of light that flooded through its windows. She sat on her porch in the evenings, listening to the rhythm of waves against the cliff below. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the idea of change began to lose its threatening edge, began to shimmer instead with possibility. It was during a conversation with Marcus about the upcoming Hirshhorn exhibition that the pieces began to fall into place. "They want you to come down to DC for the installation, you know," he said. "Spend some time with the curators, perhaps do a talk for museum members." "In August? I could do that," Eleanor said, making a note in her calendar. "Actually, they were hoping you might be available for a few weeks, help with the layout, the lighting, that sort of thing. They're treating this exhibition as a major event, Ellie. Your presence would be significant." "A few weeks," Eleanor repeated, an idea taking shape in her mind. "That's quite a commitment." "It would be good for your career," Marcus pointed out. "And Washington is lovely in the late summer, hot, but the museums are air-conditioned, and the restaurants are excellent." After hanging up, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, turning over the possibilities in her mind. A few weeks in Washington, D.C., just a short flight from Seattle. A chance to explore a new city, to see if she could imagine herself in an environment different from the isolated beauty of coastal Maine. That evening, she called Abigail. "I've been thinking about what you and Tyler suggested," she said without preamble. "About moving closer. And," Abigail's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away, "and I'm not ready to make a permanent decision yet. But I've been invited to spend several weeks in Washington, D.C. this August, for the installation of my pieces at the Hirshhorn. I thought afterward I might come to Seattle for a while, a month maybe 2. See what it feels like to be there for more than just a visit." "Mom, that would be amazing," Abigail exclaimed, dropping the neutrality. "You could stay with us, we have plenty of room in the new house. Or if you prefer more independence, there's a wonderful artist co-op downtown with short-term rental spaces. Studios with small living quarters attached. Tyler knows someone who lives there. He could make inquiries." "The co-op sounds perfect," Eleanor said, relieved that Abigail understood her need for a degree of autonomy. "A trial run, so to speak." "Exactly," Abigail agreed. "No pressure, just exploration." By the time Eleanor arrived in Washington, D.C. in early August, her plan had evolved into something more concrete. She would spend 3 weeks working with the Hirshhorn curators on the exhibition, then fly to Seattle for a 2-month stay in the artist co-op Tyler had helped arrange. Following that, she would return to Maine for the winter to decide whether a more permanent relocation made sense. Marcus had been right about the importance of being present for the installation. The curators valued her input on everything from the positioning of her paintings in relation to other artists' work to the specific lighting that would best capture the emotional nuances of each piece. The experience was both exhausting and exhilarating. A deep dive into the professional art world that Eleanor had always engaged with somewhat peripherally, focused as she had been on the solitary act of creation. The night before the exhibition's opening, walking back to her hotel from a dinner with the museum's director and several other featured artists, Eleanor found herself thinking about the strange, circuitous path that had brought her to this moment. If Abigail hadn't found her, would she still be in her studio in Maine, producing technically proficient but emotionally restrained works? Would she ever have broken through to the raw honesty that now characterized her paintings? There was no way to know, of course, but the thought reinforced her growing conviction that life's most significant turns often came disguised as disruptions, as upheavals of the status quo. David leaving had seemed like an ending, but it had freed her to discover new aspects of herself, her art. Abigail's appearance had initially felt like a complication, but it had opened doors to connection and creativity she had believed permanently closed. Now, standing on the precipice of another potential change, she felt more curious than afraid, more open to possibility than wedded to certainty. The exhibition opening was a triumph, her work prominently featured, critically acclaimed, viewed by hundreds of art lovers who moved slowly from painting to painting, absorbing the emotional journey Eleanor had captured on canvas. Standing in the gallery, listening to strangers discuss the meaning they found in her most personal creations, she felt a peculiar sense of completion, as if a circle had closed, as if the pain and confusion she had transformed into art had now completed its purpose, returning to her as affirmation and connection. When she boarded the plane for Seattle the following day, it was with a lightness she hadn't expected. Not the anxiety of leaving behind the familiar, but the anticipation of moving toward something new and potentially wonderful. The artist co-op exceeded her expectations, a converted warehouse in a vibrant Seattle neighborhood, with high ceilings, abundant natural light, and a community of creators working in various mediums from painting to pottery to digital design. Her assigned space included a generous studio area and a small but well-designed living quarters with a loft bedroom, a compact kitchen, and a surprisingly spacious bathroom. "This is perfect," she told Abigail and Tyler when they came to help her settle in. "I can work here, live comfortably, and still have my independence. And you're only 20 minutes from our house," Abigail pointed out. "Close enough for impromptu dinners, but not so close that we're in each other's pockets." The 2 months that followed developed into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor painted in her studio during the day, exploring new themes and techniques inspired by her changing circumstances. 3 evenings a week, she joined fellow artists from the co-op for communal dinners where they discussed their work, shared resources and contacts, and occasionally arranged informal critiques of each other's projects. Weekends were typically spent with Abigail and Tyler, sometimes at their house for leisurely brunches that stretched into afternoon conversations, sometimes exploring Seattle's neighborhoods, museums, and parks. Occasionally, they would venture further afield. A day trip to a nearby island, a hike in the Cascade Mountains, a weekend at a rustic cabin on the Olympic Peninsula. Through it all, Eleanor found herself noting the differences and similarities between this West Coast city and the East Coast environments she had known all her life. Seattle was younger, more casual, more technology-focused than Boston, with a different relationship to nature, the mountains and water that surrounded it seeming less like borders and more like integral parts of the urban landscape. The people were different too, more informal in dress and manner, more open to conversations with strangers, less constrained by tradition and hierarchy. In the art community, she noticed a greater emphasis on innovation and cross-disciplinary collaboration, a willingness to experiment that resonated with her own creative evolution. Most significantly, she observed the life Abigail and Tyler had built together, their comfortable home gradually filling with furniture and art that reflected their shared aesthetic, their easy partnership evident in the way they moved around each other in the kitchen or finished each other's thoughts in conversation. She watched them prepare for the possibility of a child, Tyler researching the best schools in their neighborhood, Abigail converting a spare room into a nursery with pale yellow walls and shelves waiting to be filled with books and toys. As her scheduled departure approached, Eleanor found herself increasingly reluctant to leave, not just because of Abigail and the growing possibility of grandchildren, but because she had discovered an unexpected affinity for this place, these people, this way of life. The decision crystallized one evening in late October, as she sat in her co-op studio watching rain streak the large windows, turning the city lights into blurred constellations. She had been working on a new painting, part of a series inspired by her time in Seattle, capturing the juxtaposition of urban energy and natural beauty that characterized the city. Looking at the canvas, at the layers of color and texture she had built up over days of work, she realized she wasn't ready to return to Maine, to the isolation that had once seemed necessary but now felt limiting. The thought of her house on the cliff, empty through the long winter months, no longer represented peace and independence but a kind of stagnation, a retreat from the fullness of life that was now available to her. The next day she called Marcus. "I'm thinking of staying in Seattle," she said without preamble. "Not just for a few more months but permanently. Or at least, open-endedly." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "I can't say I'm surprised, Ellie. Your emails have been full of the place, the light, the landscapes, the artist community you found there. You're not upset? About representing my work from across the country? In case you haven't noticed, we're living in a digital age," he said dryly. "Besides, your star is rising, my dear. The Hirshhorn exhibition has generated interest from galleries and collectors all over the country. Geography matters less than it used to." Relieved, Eleanor moved on to practical considerations. "I'll need to figure out what to do with the house in Maine. I'm not ready to sell it, not yet. But it shouldn't just sit empty. Winter rentals are always in demand," Marcus suggested. "Or you could look into an artist-in-residence program. Offer the space to someone who needs solitude and inspiration, the same way it served you." The idea appealed to Eleanor. The thought of her grandmother's house continuing to nurture creativity, to provide sanctuary for another artist seeking renewal. I'll look into that, she promised. And in the meantime, I need to find a more permanent situation here in Seattle. That weekend, over dinner at Abigail and Tyler's house, Eleanor shared her decision. I've decided to stay, she said simply, watching their faces for their reaction. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. Really? You're sure? I'm sure, Eleanor said. This feels right in ways I didn't expect. Not just being close to you, although that's a huge part of it, but everything, the arts community here, the energy of the city, the landscapes that are so different from what I've painted before. It's inspiring me in new ways. We're so happy, Tyler said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. But we don't want you to feel pressured.